Hi, we're joined today by Professor Thobeka Nkomo at the very beautiful and historic University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa. And Thobeka Nkomo, Professor Thobeka Nkomo, is actually a social worker. She has a very long history on the ground doing social work. Her career started, I don't want to give away her age, in 1994. And as such, she has a very interesting perspective on the South African landscape coming into her career at the changeover of the apartheid era. And not only that, but she's had an extensive career into the new dawn of the new era. And she's obviously a leading academic holding a professorship at the university here in Johannesburg. Welcome to the show, Professor. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you, Aidan. I'm doing well. And thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I'm going to get straight into it because we have so many questions and we just don't have a lot of time. I'd like to start with the early part of your career in the transition to democracy. You actually came into your career as a social worker in 1994, which is exactly at the changeover into the democratic era, departing from the very dreadful apartheid era.
Correct.
What was it like at the time on the ground doing social work at that particular point in your career? When you look back, is there anything about that particular time, maybe about the politics of the environment or about the changing social landscape that to this day still sticks out in your mind?
Okay, thank you, Aidan, for the question. I'll start from the last bit of the university, 1993, when the president was released, the first democratic president. In that year, I was in my final year. Okay. And I was in the Eastern Cape in the University of the then UNITRA, University of Transkei. So I would say I was looking forward to 1994. It was going to be the year where we have the first president and democratic president. And in my mind, it was an insight of saying, okay, we are now going to practice as social workers freely. You know, you've got ample time and choices you have to say, I can practice on this. But there was also that skepticism that whether this practice is going to be a genuine practice and were we going to be indeed free to practice as social workers. But I took it and I was like, okay, I'll go there and just do the best I could. And I graduated and I hit the ground running to make a difference to the people that really needed help or people who were really in need. And I could see the difference because people were really coming out for help, and in terms of culture competency and culture diversity, I think that was what was crucial, because then you could engage particularly with people who you share the same culture, same language, and it was easy for them to express themselves. And also the other dynamic was the dynamic of age. You know, yes. When you deal with older people and you are younger, and there were instances where people would say, but you are so young, then I would have to rephrase and be like, I might be young in terms of years, but in terms of knowledge and understanding and experience, I might be of good source. And I think what helped me then was the aspect of respect, because even though, yes, I was young in terms of years, how I approached, the tone I used for the elderly people kept me going. So practicing social work coupled with the values, which is respect and empathy, kept me going in that, particularly from moving from the era of apartheid, where people knew nothing other than harsh or being treated harshly, to something that was more gentle and more understanding.
The culture of respect for your elders, in my opinion, is often more firmly entrenched in African cultures than it is in some European cultures. It's more distinct inside the family unit, and it's practiced more diligently. That's my personal experience, and it sounds to me like that is maybe, in a sense, what you experienced in your early career. Coming in and finding a little bit more pressure within African communities, Black African communities, to practice a little bit more respect for the elders as a way of being.
That's correct. You are quite correct, because how the behavior is structured or how we are socialized in terms of different ethical background or cultures is completely different. So we have a term in social work that if you are not competent in certain cultural aspects, rather don't venture if you are not prepared to learn. But if you are prepared to learn when you don't know, there's no harm in saying to people, no, I don't know, or no, in my way, this is how we do things, or this, what you are doing means this, or this word is rude or it's harsh. Rather use this one, even if in some cultures it might mean, oh, it's a normal thing. For example, a simple thing is an elderly person, you can't just call a person by his or her name. If that person is older than
Yes.
you need to give that prefix, Mama's
Yes.
Banban or Baba's Banban or Brother's Banban or Sister's Banban. So that carries you a long way in your life if you fully understand in terms of being competent in the culture that you are dealing with.
I'm obviously just joking now, but I have a friend in Tokozo, and he said one day we were asking each other questions, and he said to me, "What is it like to speak back to your parents?" He said, "In my family, we don't know." He was obviously, we were joking.
Yeah.
But in a way, I guess we also weren't joking. I guess he also wasn't to some extent.
Yeah.
Did you find that there was an overwhelming shortage of black social workers during that transition to apartheid, from the apartheid era into the democratic era, finding that, for example, not enough Zulu-speaking social workers in KwaZulu-Natal, or not enough Xhosa-speaking in Eastern Cape, or problems like that?
I would say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that people, even if they had degrees then people would rush to better settings, moving away from rural areas
Yes.
to better settings, to city or suburbs. And yes, in the sense that in rural areas there was lack of social workers, or if they were there in terms of accessing the social work services due to transportation or the location or the vicinity, therefore there was that challenge. And the social workers were really there, but for a certain demographic group that were serving particularly in better places. So yes, there was a shortage, and yes, there were social workers, however, accessing them because of other socio-economic conditions. It was not easy to access the social work services from the black communities.
That makes complete sense. It's the same for medical care,
Yes.
for example, where if you live somewhere rural, you need specialized transport. You might need multiple transport options to get to a clinic or a government social services office or something like that. So that makes complete sense. You now train and teach the next generation of social workers. And South Africa's gone through a period over the last 20, 30 years, or so the narrative goes, that professions like nursing and policing are in decline. They've said things like, I hear very often from police officers, where they say pay has declined against inflation over the last 20, 30 years. Working conditions aren't as good as they used to be. There's less resources. For example, there's always a shortage of laptops or vehicles to get out to rural areas or even urban areas now. And I was wondering, do social workers in their professional capacity also suffer from similar problems now in South Africa?
Okay. I would say in terms of the training, my observation is to commend the government first, because there were resources offered to train social workers, for example, bursaries. So student would come and train for social work. Yes, genuinely so, it was a passion, but in some instances you realize that it's an option. No, I was not taken from a particular degree, therefore option B would be social work, and then they come in. And because of that, we have seen a decline in a number of things, a number of the quality of service that is being provided, because that passion is no longer there. I'm doing social work is a by the way. Or there's also workload issues where you get allocated a place and then you get hired, but the area in which you are working in, you are either one or two, then you are serving a bigger population and with limited resources. Whether it's at an office, there are instances where some social workers in some area, they render services in dilapidated offices. There's no resources, and if the resources are there, they are minimal. You are sharing even the office space. And so because of that, the quality of social work and social work practice, we are seeing a decline. And the other reason that is common that is known is an issue around pay. If you compare the professional degrees that we have, there is a belief or there's a reality that social workers are the least paid. And we have fought and we continue fighting in terms of equal pay. So yes, there is that decline in terms of people choosing social work because it's a passion, or they're just choosing it because it's a option. And in the university space is that we've seen as lecturers that students will come in first year, yes, I do want to do social work, and then second, third year they venture to something else, they drop.
That makes complete sense. The way that I've seen this develop in South Africa is there was a certain time in history where you could pay social workers, polices, nurses, teachers relatively badly compared to the average of their learned peers. Mm-hmm. And because the job was a calling, because you got people that actually really wanted to do that job, mm-hmm. they were happy to be there. And they did it anyway, and they accepted the, on average, low pay. Mm-hmm. And what's happened over the last 10, 20 years is that caseloads have gone through the roof, so workload's gone way up. Teachers, for example, way more children in the class. Police, way too many dockets. Some police have 500 open cases at a time. And they are no longer prepared to accept all three. Bad pay, bad working conditions, not enough resources. One of the three they accepted all their lives for forever. And it sounds to me like social workers in some way are also suffering from that same issue.
Yes, you are quite right. However, having said that, the constant insight or empowerment that we give to students is that initially social work was like you're doing generic. You do everything and anything without specializing. So now we are equipping students to say, you can do your basic degree, undergrad, and then decide for several reasons. Decide in your master's, I'm going to do social work in school, or social work in occupational social work, or social work in social development. And one of the reasons why we say to students, capacitate yourself or develop yourself is for the same reason of pay. Because the higher you get the degree, the more doors you are opening for yourself. Or, with social work, we always say you can go anywhere. Any company, whether it's a private practice or government, as long as you can prove that you have an ability of doing a particular job. So we are now moving away from generic practice. Of course, people who can't afford post-grad studies, then they still remain practicing generic social work, which will obviously lead to constant burnout and workload issues.
Do they have is there issues with enormous caseloads, like the police having 500 caseloads, 500 cases open at any given time?
Yes, there are, for example, cases in terms of foster care. You would hear that there are backlogs in terms of report writing and cases that needs to be finalized, or cases of adoption that needs to be finalized, or even cases that involve criminal practices that need social work perspective. There's always a consistent workload issue and backlog issues that needs to be catered for. And what we have seen now is that there is the new trend is that we are overtraining. There's quite a number of social workers. However, employment is limited. And that comes from the bursaries that were issued, but now the employment in terms of stationing those social workers, the budget cuts and all that. So they're out there, but there is no employment.
Even medical doctors now in South Africa aren't getting absorbed to the market. It's a huge problem. It's aside from this conversation, but there's an economic misalignment between the production of intellectual minds from universities and the job market in general. It's just with youth unemployment at hitting 60% or 70% or whatever it is, it's very, very difficult for people under 30 to find anything, even with multiple degrees.
And what's fun is that, or what's surprising is that if they then upskill, then you get to the job market, you are overqualified. Then the issue of paying you and balancing the salary and what you have becomes a challenge. So we constantly fight the battle that we don't know by when are we going to be able to say we are winning the battle.
I guess we'll never know. I'd like to switch topics very quickly. There is a macroeconomist, well-known macroeconomist in South Africa, who talks about the first 1,000 days of a child's life from the day of inception. He talks about not from the day of birth. And he says, quite rightly so in my opinion, that this is the absolute best economic investment that you can make in an entire country, is to invest well in that first 1,000 days of a child's life. Proper natal care, proper prenatal care, making sure that families have enough food, enough toys, enough nutrition, enough childcare, because those are results that compound all the way through a human being's life. It's not something that's just advantageous when they're small. That head start exists forever. And if they are disadvantaged, the disadvantage is forever. And off the back of that, I would like to then ask about the issues around early childhood care in South Africa, childhood nutrition. We are in a case in South Africa right now where children are actually starving to death. It's not obviously en masse, but this is happening all the time. We have starving children on our back door. And not only that, but the latest data suggests that children in South Africa are severely malnourished. And not just a small population of children, stunted growth and stunted development for quite a broad population of South Africa's children. And to ask you what you think about that first 1,000 days, what can be done to improve that first 1,000 days, and just how dire is the situation?
Okay. The first 1,000 days from conception to birth are very critical for a child. Hence, it is also important for mothers to be well cared for in terms of health, in terms of food, in terms of the environment, so that by the time they give birth to a healthy baby and also they remain healthy. However, the trend has now been that we see pregnancy of young children or young girls, which also contributes to the issue of food sustainability. So if you then give birth to a malnutritioned child because you didn't have access, obviously you will have a child who will have constantly problems in terms of health, not only physical health, but mental health and self-esteem and all that. So it's important that in our country, much as, yes, we are experiencing the escalation of malnutrition children, it's an Africa thing. But also in our country as South Africa, we are seeing growth in terms of malnutrition, and there's a lot that can be done. However, not one department or one stakeholder can do that. Stakeholders need to partner to make sure that they are taking care of the prenatal, as you have said, or antenatal issues, health issues, social development issues, and childcare issues. So in some areas or in some aspects where there is no support for children, then you experience, or children's upbringing, then you experience the results of lack of food or child-headed families, or where there's no one to supervise, or where the child was born out of rape or whatever, and there's neglect, and all those things happen. So we need to constantly bear in mind that we have to work as collaborators in terms of different stakeholders, whether you are from government or you are from an NGO, which also is another issue with NGO, even if they come in to help the government, with the funds now being cut for NGOs, fighting a battle that you know that there is no, or there's limited resources with competing demands. It's very difficult to say we will eventually win the battle of food sustainability, but we continuously fight. Yeah.
It's it's obviously a never-ending fight. No African country has really ever solved this problem. Even in some first world countries, you get outlying populations where children are malnourished and there's not enough food to go around. I'm just wondering, for a lot of people living in South Africa, because South Africa is food stable at a macroeconomic level, and people go to the shops and they always see the shelves full of food, it's very difficult for the average South African to even imagine a circumstance under which a child can starve to death. What are the circumstances under which this happens? How does this kind of thing take place? Is it a case where you just have people that are so rurally isolated, and they're just so isolated from resources, from networks, from help, from employment, that they just literally stay out in these rural places, and the kids just starve?
If I take you back, Aidan, in terms of rural life, in the olden days, you would do your food production from home, and there would be rain, and you would never barely lack food,
Yes.
because if you don't have, the neighbor would help. But with the changes that are happening now in our world, for example, the climate change issue, it's no longer easy to just cultivate your own food and produce and eat. Now you need money. Now you need access to things that you could just plant in your garden. Now you can't. The environment doesn't allow, or the climate doesn't allow you to do that. And if you are from a rural area now and you are not educated, and you do not have access to the life that is deemed to be the most suitable life, obviously you will suffer. And there is no one anymore who can easily help. So if you get a neighbor who can help you with food, it's a plus, it's a bonus these days. But in the olden days, you never had problems. So I think when people choose also to stay in rural areas, is a number of reasons why they choose to stay there. They also think, okay, if I leave and I don't have any education, where do I live? If I leave and I leave my livelihood here, how am I going to survive in future? And if I leave whatever that was given to me, how am I going to survive? So there's a number of issues, but at the same time, people don't have, or they have limited options in terms of choosing where to stay and with whom to stay and how to stay, because everyone now is looking after himself or herself to survive.
I'm so surprised at what an interesting perspective you've got, because when we have a look at economics, I deal a lot with economists and politicians and that kind of thing. And what happens is they always look at urban migration from an urban perspective. Mm-hmm. So you often hear them saying there's so many people that have moved to Cape Town or Durban or Johannesburg, and it's put the schools under pressure, and it's put social services and hospitals. And your perspective is so interesting, because you're looking at the detriment and the harm done in the rural areas as a result of rural migration towards urban areas. Very interesting perspective. You've opened my mind up to something quite interesting, that as a result of urban migration, there's not just increased pressures and suffering in cities, but in the urban areas as well. Very interesting perspective. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I personally enjoyed that a great deal. One of the problems that we also have now in South Africa, you hear it quite often from people like school principals or ministers or imams and things like that, and they talk about the breakdown of the family structure. And I would like to ask you, because you have such a long history of looking at family units and family structures, is this just a myth that older people perpetuate, saying their family structures were stronger back in my day? Or is this actually something that you experience and witness on the ground, that family units were stronger at a certain point and those ties are breaking down? Or are things just as strong as they've ever been?
In my view, there is reality in terms of family breaking down, in the sense that traditionally a family would be, we're talking of a mom, a dad, staying together, and children, and an extended family, and everything being done as a communal, arrangement. So we share everything, and we share values, we share everything. But with time, the definition of a family has evolved. Family can be myself and my kids. Yes, and family can be between two partners who just agree we're gonna be a family, and in that stance, there is a reality that in terms of values or in terms of bringing up kids, when there is no, particularly if you've got girls and boys, when there is no dad in a family and there's no uncle or whoever was close to the boy child, there's going to be detriments in terms of how that child is being brought up. Yes, the mom will do the best she can. However, there are things that are man-related that would call for a man, human being, to support, or same as the girl. If there is no mom in the house, that happens. So for me, it's an issue of values. In the previous days, it would be when you raise a child, the community raises a child. Now it's no longer in an extent that when something happens to my child and the neighbors are watching, or something happens and I'm not there, people bother less, because it's not my child, it's not my space, or there's so many hesitance in terms of, if I intervene, then I'll be asked, who asked you? Why did you get involved? So somehow the values are getting...
Values have shifted a little bit.
Shifted
maybe a little bit less Ubuntu now than they used to be.
So I take that stance to say things have drastically changed compared to the... However, I do not leave out the fact that there are families that are thriving in the midst of all the values that are, getting down and down, but there are families that are thriving, whether there's a mom and a dad, but we do see the repercussions as life goes on for a particular individual.
It's very interesting that you should say that, because I don't like to perpetuate the power dynamics of patriarchy, obviously.
Yes.
But like you say, the data definitely shows that if there's an absence of a male figure in the home, that it is particularly detrimental to the kids, and more specifically to the male children inside the house. It does have some kind of long-term impacts. And I'm not just saying this to be cruel. I was raised by my mother, so I know a little bit firsthand. But that your point that you've made definitely lines up with the data that's available on the topic.
And maybe just to add, even now, if you have an uncle, the issue of trust these days, to say, okay, I have an uncle who can look after my boy child or my girl child, there's that hesitancy, because now anyone and everyone can do harm.
Yes.
So you always have to be vigilant, whether you are a mom or a dad. When it comes to your kids and their safety, you always have to be vigilant. So the ties of sharing Ubuntu are becoming looser and looser.
I suppose that the very high prevalence of gender-based violence and violence against children, either sexual or just assault, physical assault, because it's so prevalent in South Africa, I guess that you are right. It has put communities under tension, and it has put philosophies like Ubuntu or Ujama, as it originally was, under a little bit of tension, where I guess there's just been a little bit of breakdown in community trust.
For sure.
And that definitely has a negative impact on everyone. I'd like to talk about policing. One of my biggest critiques about policing in South Africa over the last 10 or 15 years in particular is not actually a slight towards police officers themselves. It's actually a slight towards the system as a whole. I often find that police officers are doing the jobs of social workers because there aren't enough social workers in the correct places at the right times. So you'll often have a police officer who isn't trained, for example, in a certain domestic violence situation or in a certain family dynamic situation, and this has become an enormous police problem. But when I think about it, it's actually an issue of not having enough social workers in police stations. And just to ask you, what is your opinion about the idea around placing social workers permanently embedded within police stations, and for that matter of fact, within schools?
Okay. Recently, the department, in terms of social development and SAPS, and also Department of Education, I think there's now an aspect or an insight where people realize that there is a need to place social workers at schools to place social workers at police station. And the main reason at police station, because police station requires a person who has empathy.
Empathy, absolutely.
Yes. So if you do not have empathy, then you will not be able to handle the issues that come to the police station. So if you have never been trained, and understandably, so I take your point when you say police station police are doing social work's job, and on top of that, there's workload.
Yes.
So remember, when the screen is just 1, 2, 1, 2, next. So there's no thorough assessment, or there's no time for thorough assessment. And yet, if you have a trained social worker stationed in the police station, that person would do a thorough assessment and a proper intervention. And this then the lack of thorough assessment leads to some of the cases being thrown out because lack of evidence and because there was no assessment by a trained person. So if you have a person who is trained, then you will have proper record keeping and proper assessment and proper outcomes. So I stand for the idea of having social workers in police station, also in schools, because at schools you meet different kids from different communities, from different backgrounds, different upbringing, so the social worker is able to assess.
Especially in poorer areas, in poorer schools where they have less resources.
Yes.
So if you go to a top private school here in Sandton, there's only 15 or 20 kids in a class, there's extra people.
Yes.
But in the poorer schools where there's not enough teachers and not enough resources and not enough principals, there really should be one in every single school. And not only that, but I think that SAPS and station commanders should start reaching out to social workers to see if they can bring them into police stations to help do supplementary training for police officers. So I spend a lot of time in police stations, not as a criminal, but I'm in and out of them fair amount. And some of the things I've seen over the years, I was in Bramley Police Station just a couple of months ago, and there was a woman that was trying to have a maintenance order delivered from the court. A police officer has to obviously do that, and the woman now has to go with, because she has to identify the person that's getting this. And the officers were so rude, they were so nasty. The woman was obviously upset and emotional. She'd been several times to the police station. They wouldn't help her, and for me, they needed specifically either a social worker or some kind of social worker training from someone with expertise in the field. Definitely.
So yes, I agree with you, and not only in a micro level, because station commanders or principals at the schools on their own, they will not be able. But if we do approach it from the systematic point of view and collaboration, say departments and stakeholders like Department of Education, what are your needs? Collaborate with Department of Social Development, collaborate with SAPS, what are your needs? How best can we then make sure? Because social development knows how many social workers are out there, and it's an issue of money.
Yes.
If we place them to police stations, an issue of who's going to pay for them. Is it the salaries? Course. Do they come from SAPS or do they come from social development? So for me, it's an issue of system. If this collaboration can be made meaningful, and then resources be allocated according to need, and whoever gets the resources have enough budget to cater for the needs that are needed by the people from the ground. So
no, I absolutely agree with that. A little bit of interdepartmental cohesion.
Yes.
I would like to talk about drugs in South Africa. We have an enormous problem. Drug use appears to be on the rise, and it's obviously very widespread. We have a problem with fentanyl, Mandrax, Tuk, Nyaope. There's one or two other new ones. Not the very rich drugs anymore, things like cocaine and that kind of thing. Those are very expensive. But the cheaper, more freely available drugs that more often than not come from China in chemicals, get manufactured in Mozambique or other African countries, then come across the border. In South Africa, we almost strictly deal with drugs as a criminal matter. And a lot of places in the world have found that they're getting better results when they look at drugs more as a social problem than a legal and law enforcement issue. They find that they get better long-term results in terms of rehabilitation, getting people back into the workforce, stability of the family environment, and that sort of thing. And I would just like to ask you, what is your opinion on the balance of social policies and of criminal legal policies on the drug pandemic that we're having in South Africa?
Okay. When we look at the drug pandemic, people who use or misuse or abuse drugs, they come from families, right? Whether they're young or adults, but they come from families. So for me, if we can start from the values, the family values, as the children grow up, start from there in terms of instilling the family values, and also avoid perpetuating the use of drugs, because once my child starts using and brings the drug at home and I keep quiet, the problem starts there, because that behavior will continue with no repercussion until that child becomes or labeled as a criminal. And by that stage, it's already late to do anything. So the collaboration or the partnership should then start at an early stage to say, when there is a drug problem from early age, let it be addressed. So that when we then treat or try to support the child, then we know when we take you to rehab, we're not throwing you to a prison, but we are taking you as a human being and deal with you as a human being and say, the only challenge that we're dealing here with is the drug use or drug abuse. So we want to make sure that when you are reinstated back to the community, you're going to be a better person. So I do acknowledge the fact that access is becoming loosely.
Rehab centers are, there's so few of them, and most of them are private.
There's private, they need money, so that becomes an issue. And also, when we have managed to take whoever needs rehabilitation to rehab centers, in terms of reunification back to the community, the programs are less.
Yes.
So when you come out, there's little to do. There's unemployment. So you absolutely go back. You're going to relapse back to what you were doing and what you thought, okay, if I abuse drug, I go to the rehab, I eat, I have a place to sleep. So you relapse, you go back to. So I think that partnership in terms of making sure that the resources that we need in terms of dealing with drug are not only focusing on criminal law or making sure that we are punishing most of the time. Yes, there will be cases where we need to focus on the criminal law or the legislation around drug abuse, but at the same time, we need to make sure that the resources for those who can benefit from the resources of rehabilitation, there's enough of them, and reunification, if we have to take them back to the communities, there's going to be resources that are going to support them to be meaningful or to be independent human beings.
That's an excellent thought that you've had, and it reinforces an idea that I've been lent by somebody else, that anytime that you have a community of young unemployed people, especially men, I don't want to again hammer on, I'm obviously a man, so I say this from my own perspective, but if you leave young men just lying around to do nothing all day, they will cause trouble, and drug use will become prevalent when it's available. So your point definitely feeds back into that idea that I've come across before. Just a quick question, your opinion on cannabis legislation. Cannabis is about to go, for lack of a better term, full California in 2026. We see all of these shops popping up on every street corner. It's very freely available now. It's very, very powerful. It's very, very strong. It's now a completely different cannabis to what people were smoking 30 years ago, 50 years ago. THC's gone from 3% to 30%. And given that they're about to legalize it and it's going to be widely dispensed, do you think that this is a good idea, a bad idea, that it's going to do long-term harm, or that it'll just kind of become like alcohol, that it'll sort of be left up to each community and family unit to deal with the problem as they see fit?
In this one, I'm going to give my honest opinion, that, okay, legalizing it and say, let it be treated as one of the prescribed medication or whatever for whatever reason. My belief is that it will be prone to abuse, whether it's legalized or whatever, because people will then abuse it. And my worry or my concern when it is abused, the long-term effect. effect. Much as it would have been meant to treat and for immediate, relief of something, but we look at the long-term effect. What are they going to be? If they're going to be negative to the well-being, the overall well-being of the human being, then what's the use? How are we going to mitigate that? Whatever was meant for good is eventually used for bad, and which will then again create an extra burden to the community of having people to be rehabilitated again. So my concern is around, much as we are going to make it legitimate and legalize it, how we're going to mitigate the downfall of it being abused. And access, because also if it's then going to be accessed by children or young adults who really do not have any reason to be getting it, how are we going to make sure that we are protecting our younger ones? And also access with unemployment, people will steal and sell it for money, and we're still creating another.
The black market for cannabis won't go away just because they formalize the market.
It really won't go away. It really won't go away. So there's pros and cons.
I'll briefly just say I'm for it. I'm pro the legalization, but my caveat, my nuance is that it requires a very, very tight, very good regulation and control.
Yes.
And my worry is that in South Africa, at the current time, we don't seem to be that good at regulating and controlling things. Like, just for example, if you have a look at our problem with drinking and driving, it doesn't give me a lot of faith to think that we're going to
have the capacity to
use responsibly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We also have great policies and whatever, but in terms of implementing and monitoring. So if you legislate, yes, there was going to be legislation about cannabis, and then, how are we going to monitor and make sure that it doesn't create harm as it is meant for, making that things are going fine. But then you never know.
I off the back of that, I think that you are right. There could be a potential for more harm than good if it's not properly regulated. Having said that, I feel that we already, to some degree, or to a large degree, actually in South Africa, suffered this problem already with alcohol. We are not a responsible nation in terms of alcohol consumption. We can see this on the stats around domestic violence off the back of alcohol consumption, road accidents, road deaths off the back of alcohol consumption. We're just not a responsible nation. And I would like to ask you if you think our laws around alcohol are adequate, or if we need new regulations in South Africa, or if the regulations we have around alcohol are adequate but not properly enforced.
The regulations are adequate, but there is no enforcement, or there's minimal enforcement, and there is no consequence for any behavior. If you are caught, it could just be a minimal something. So the laws are there and they're great, but the enforcement is, for me, it's lacking. Hence, we have a problem of domestic violence and all the criminal cases going up due to alcohol abuse. So for me, it's around legislation not being enforced.
Yeah, I thought that would be your answer. Unfortunately, we just don't do very well, not just at the police level, but at the court level, as well. You often find you get a person there on their third drinking and driving incident before they get into trouble. And we're definitely not a country that consumes alcohol responsibly. Obviously, many people do, but many people don't.
Yeah.
This is a very controversial topic given the nature of xenophobia in South Africa. Xenophobia has obviously been around for quite some time, but starting from around about 2010, after the global financial crisis, when South Africa came under increased financial pressure and communities started to come under increased financial and economic pressures, you found that xenophobia started to come up on the rise. And incidents of violence around xenophobia started to emerge more often. And one of the things that came off of that was many people, not just members of the public, but politicians as well. I can't remember who it was. It may have been Herman Mashaba. I'm not exactly sure. Was advocating for the idea that foreigners in South Africa should be cut off from social services. In other words, barred from access to clinics, barred from access to social workers and that kind of thing. The argument is that this would harm South Africans just as much as it would harm foreigners. Do you think, given that we are a resource scarce country, that this is a good idea to say that we deny foreigners? For example, there was a minister, don't you remember, she said that foreigners shouldn't get helped even at the hospital. She said that they should go away. And what your opinion is on this kind of problem that's emerging?
Okay, for me, first, we speak of foreigners. We speak of documented or non-documented foreigners. But at the back of the category or categorizing people, we're dealing with human beings. So when it comes to access to health or health services, anyone in our country should be able to access, particularly if there is a crisis. I mean, if I get to the hospital and I'm injured and I'm a foreigner, I shouldn't be barred from accessing services because at the particular time there is a need, which is a healthcare need that I need to get. However, if I have to pay for services, whether I'm a foreigner or not, I need to be able to pay. And if there are financial processes that need to be catered for on a long-time basis, and obviously there are agreements, bilateral agreements between countries, which is where I think the problem is for me. If those are not adhered to, we just service. Of course, at the end of the day, the people who are from the country of origin will suffer because we've got an additional and there is no extra income that is coming in to make sure that we will cover for everyone. So for me, it's about those bilateral relationships that are not, for a lack of better word, well managed. Yes. If I service people from another country and there's an agreement that as soon as this is done, like we do in universities. Universities, if you are going to admit an international student, there's a fee upfront. Why are we not doing the same? So I think for me it's an issue of managing those bilateral relationship and managing the systems so that at the end of the day we know you will be here, you'll be paid for. When you exit, you go to a proper place rather than again coming back as a second time a person in need of services.
It's very interesting. What I'm hearing in a sense is that poor relations, international relations management, in a way manifests itself as xenophobia on the ground, in communities. So you have an issue that should actually be solved at a macro level by international relations actors, say diplomats and ministers and that kind of thing. And because they're not doing a great job at that, it actually manifests as various forms of violence, either on social media or physical violence or... but I definitely thought that what the minister said was inappropriate.
Definitely.
And not only that, but it was not just philosophically inappropriate and ethically inappropriate. I found that the rationale was lacking. So you get a person, they come in, they say, I think I've got TB. I'm not a South African citizen. Will you help me? No, we won't help you. But they put that in a taxi filled with other people with the TB, coughing on the way home, or whatever similar circumstances it is. So even though morally and ethically the rationale to not help foreigners with social services is flawed, scientifically it's flawed as well.
Because they'll come back and infect the very same, then you have a bigger problem rather than being able to treat that immediate problem there and then and know that we have blocked whatever that was going to expand. So,
you can't have healthy individuals without a healthy community.
Yeah, exactly.
Other than policing, we have an enormous issue with gender-based violence. We arguably have the worst gender-based violence of any country in the world. We're definitely up there. We're definitely in the worst few. And one of the most common narratives that comes up is to say that we do not have enough police to enforce laws in the population, and that's why gender-based violence is so prevalent. I personally believe that even if we do up law enforcement, gender-based violence will still continue because there's other issues that help drive that. There's not just policing is a barrier issue. That's a stick to stop people from doing that kind of thing. But you also need other things. I'm just not sure what. So other than policing, what would you like to see more of in South Africa to turn the tide on the scourge of gender-based violence against women?
I support the idea of having police and maybe upping up the police force. My other view is that if we do not have we do not take care of the socialization, change the mindset around socialization from the family setting, we're not going to win the gender-based violence issue. Because if we perpetuate, as families perpetuate that so-and-so is superior than so-and-so, we are perpetuating gender-based violence indirectly or directly so. But if I know that human beings from the early age, we are the same, we should be treated the same. If your word, now I'm going to make you an example, if your word to say when you're like, yes, because he's a man, whatever he says goes. If I say it, yes, she is a woman, you can't. And even if I say it the same way as you are saying it, but because it comes from a woman,
yes.
And if these chores are for girls and these chores are for boys, in a way we are raising someone's wife or someone's husband or someone's partner who will eventually think I'm the superior person. So we need to, from the beginning, as children are growing up, make sure that we address. We also need to empower individuals. If I don't like something, I need to be able to voice it out, not suppress. That culture of suppressing and be like, no, I can't say it. I can't argue. I can't question it because then it will result. I need to be empowered to raise. I need also, the other one need to also to be informed that if I say I don't like it, I mean it.
Yes.
And you should be able to listen. So I think those are some of the skills that we need to be refining from the very early age, so that we minimize all these cases leading up to people killing each other for the sake of love, people killing each other for the sake of thinking that they are dominant, people buying love for them to survive. So people being dependent because they have nowhere else to go. So if I'm not empowered and not skilled and don't have anything of my own, I will succumb to anything or any treatment that I get in the name of survival. So I think those are some of the things that we constantly have to teach and empower and empower and empower. Yeah.
One mechanism that I've advocated for quite a long time that would help to mitigate against the exact problem that you're talking about now is to teach the Bill of Rights to children in schools from an early age. I'm not talking about having a whole curriculum.
Yes.
But once a year from grade 1, there should be a 1 or 2 day course where all the kids in the whole grade learn about the Bill of Rights just at a basic level. And again in grade 2 and again in grade 3, because I think that we have one of the best bills of rights and constitutions in the
100%,
world.
Yeah.
I think our constitution is very, very adequate and very well developed. And when you speak to kids, even at a high school level, they're not aware of their rights. They're not aware of the rights of their peers. They're not aware of the basic overarching laws of the country. And I think that if you could find a way to entrench the Bill of Rights as a part of school curriculum from a young age, it would help to show all children across the board equality before the law.
And coupled with that Bill of Rights being taught and in a scaffolding way, obviously, depending on the age, whatever, you couple that with responsibilities so that from the very early age, they know that their rights, there are also responsibilities. As they develop in their, physiological development, they know, okay, these are my rights, these are my responsibilities, this is how I express when I don't like something, this is how I appreciate or show appreciation when I agree with something. So from that age, I really, truly support making sure that the Bill of Rights and responsibilities is incorporated into the curriculum. Like they mustn't meet it at a university level when they are already as young adults already by then. So, but if they get it from the very early age, it would add a plus.
I work with a psychologist, and we do these talks in schools. If anybody's interested, you can contact Ben and I on Black and Brown Productions, and we offer these talks for free at schools. So if you're a school teacher or a principal and you'd like to have this done at your school, contact Ben and I, and we'll help you out. But what I'd like to get to is we have such mixed reactions. So I've had school principals before where they welcome you in with open arms, and you get there and there's 500 or 600 kids waiting in the hall, and everything's set up and they're so happy to have you. And then you get other school teachers and school principals who turn around, they say, you want to talk about rights? Oh no. They say you're going to cause too many problems. They say all the kids are going to be fighting and the parents are going to be suing us. So there's also a little bit of fear and apprehension about having these conversations, especially later on. But if you have kids that are exposed to these ideas very early on in their education, they'll be more inclined to have mature conversations about these things later on. The high schools don't like these talks. I've done a couple at private schools. I charge the private schools. The government schools I don't charge, but you'd be surprised how many people they just say, absolutely not. We don't talk about this kind of thing. Here we do education.
But also that speaks to the need of also empowering the teachers, the educators themselves, to say, okay, pre-preparation sort of, to say, when you come to your school to address 1, 2, 3, this is what we are dealing with, and these are the reasons, or this is the rationale for dealing with this. And coupled with the educators, we also find some objection from the parents.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, to say this in my family or in my household, we don't talk about this, we don't do this, we don't.
Yes.
But at the same time, the repercussion of keeping quiet or making it a taboo, they're bigger than keeping quiet about something that needs to be shared or conversed about. So I agree with the schools being engaged, but address all the educators and more emphasis on the benefits, to say, yes, you might see it as a challenge now, but in the long run, we are creating a society that will benefit us as a whole. So, and those conversations, the frank and open conversation, and difficult as they might be, but at the end of the day, they are beneficial to the nation and the society.
I'm fairly well trained in having these conversations, and we work along with a psychologist. So she's a psychologist in the field, and very often schools are still. And I had a conversation with a now retired school principal. She was a principal for 40 years or something, 35 years, and she said to me that sometimes it just isn't worth the potential harm that comes around. You get one parent on the school body and they complain, and you get one teacher and they don't want to do it. But in general, you're correct, we don't empower our teachers. They're overworked. They don't have enough resources. They're underpaid. We've obviously already discussed. But the other huge problem that teachers have, and I was wondering if social workers have the same problem, is that they're overburdened by administrative work. Just like, for example, too much paperwork, things that aren't necessary when their time could be better spent doing something else. For example, you wouldn't go into the clinic and expect the doctor to be doing the accounts. But to some extent, we kind of expect that a little bit from teachers and police now as well, overburdened by administrative work. Is it like this for social workers as well? Or?
Administration, for us, is even worse for social workers, because we have an understanding that if it's not written, then it was never done. So whatever you do, there should be paper trail.
And handwritten, not digital?
You can do digital, okay. You can handwrite, but then the time that you spend doing that writing, and you have a queue that's waiting for you to come in for services, then it doubles. Then it results to burnout. So it goes back to what we were saying in terms of resources and burnout and workload and all that. But I want to go back to the point, Ben, when we were saying people would then object in terms of, or have different views when we are addressing issues of Bill of Rights and responsibilities. I am of the view that 1 or 2 that might grasp the teaching. You will always have one or two.
Yes.
Yes, in that group that are saying, no, but this is my philosophy. If I get into the space and talk about even in churches,
yes,
share about issues of sexual reproductive health, and people will be saying, no, not in the space of the church.
Yes.
But in my mind, I just say, okay, maybe we just need to refine the tone and how we do it. Then we do it in the church and teach, because I know one or two from these congregants will get something out of it, and that person we might be saving a life. So having those conversations, there'll be doors where they'll be open. Make use of those doors. Where the doors are shut, we keep knocking until the door opens. And someday.
You have an interesting way of influencing people. You seem to be very much of the philosophy that you catch more bees with honey than with vinegar. Is this part of your training? Is this something that you have a high empath skill set that you've developed specifically as part of your training as a social worker? Or do you find some social workers are the opposite of you? They're much more rigid and they're more authoritarian. Does it change from person to person? Or in general, do you find, like psychologists, that social workers are generally quite empathetic and very communally focused?
In terms of our training, obviously we get the same training as social workers, and the key of it is empathy.
Yes.
Your empathy.
The empath skill set.
Yes. And I think also it differs from person to person. From my view, how I do things, I assess the situation. And then we normally say to the social, we start where the service user is. You don't come and impose.
Yes.
So when you say to me, okay, this is my belief, my headache can only be cured by a traditional medication, I will journey with you. Yeah. But then I'll say, are you aware of this option? Yeah. Then we journey and show you the pros and cons. At the end, my belief is that you'll be able to make your own decision, or you'll make your own choices. And there are things that from my upbringing that I've seen, and I've vouched that in my space, I will make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone, or I will do things differently. How I raise my kids is completely different from how I was raised. How I engage with women, whether married, divorced, older, or my same age, is completely different from how I was, introduced to womanhood. So I make sure that the gaps that I have identified, and because I had a benefit of learning and getting experience and getting education, I impart knowledge wherever I get an opportunity, whether it's in church, whether it's at home. So when I get an opportunity, whether it's in class, I just impart knowledge, and then in my belief, I'm throwing just a seed. Then what grows out of that seed, it will depend to where the person is being exposed to.
I think your perspective is very communal-centric, because you are embedded, in a sense, within the community. And sometimes one of the biggest problems I find with NGOs is, instead of trying to embed themselves within community, they come in from the outside with a high-handed approach. They almost come in like doing as like grandfathers, like old grandfathers, and they say, no, this is how it must be. We know better. And I often find in South Africa that doesn't go down very well.
We the ones who are going to save you. No. But we must listen to, yes, you might bring the money or bring the resources, but start where we are. Ask us, what are our needs? Then we'll journey with you. But if you're coming and, telling, then somehow
you're getting that right for sure. And many of our NGOs could learn from your philosophy and your approach, because they could go from doing quite good work to excellent work by just having a slight shift in how they deal and interact with people. Very quickly, religion in schools or for at home only?
Both.
Yes.
Both, in the sense that in South Africa, we are a democratic country. We are more prone to choices.
Yes.
Making choices. But however, when we do introduce religion, we need to understand the principle of voluntary engaging. Yes. If I don't want to, then I don't have to. If I do it out of my voluntary basis. So if we introduce religion in any space, for example, in schools, we are mindful of the fact that in the schools we've got diverse religious beliefs, and we cannot go in and say in this school we are going to absolutely focus on this type of religion because there will be a problem. However, in your family, then you can say in your family, okay, in my family our religious belief is Hindu. If it is Hindu and we're gonna abide, it's your family and that's yours. But in public spaces, you should be open-minded in terms of anything and everything that you do based on the Constitution, democratic, voluntarily. If I subscribe to it, I will do it. If I don't, it cannot be forced. In a school, if I feel I cannot close my eyes, but how I can be quiet when we are introducing a silent time, some other people's silent time means something else. So you need to be open to the diverse understanding of what religion is for different individuals.
I think that your approach on that is very, very mature, very, very balanced. And I'm hoping that with the looming implementation of the Bella Act, that leaders within schools, on parent-teacher committees, that kind of thing, are as mature in their thinking as you are. It's going to be an interesting time with regards to the implementation of religion alongside education, given the far-reaching effects of Bella.
And also I think that what is important there is an issue of when we partner, we know which strength are you big at and which one am I, so that when we collaborate as educators and religious belief or religious leaders, we know what is it that we are aiming at.
Yes.
Right? We take our own interests, put them aside. The focus as a child, as a school child, what is it that we want to impart? What is it that we want to instill in that child when we balance education and religious belief and then take it from there?
I myself am an atheist. I'm by birth Jewish. I'm a vehement atheist. Having said that, I'm an advocate of religion. I believe that there's so many benefits to religion: Hinduism, Christianity. Islam, right across the spectrum, that they offer a sense of purpose, a sense of community, a moral and ethical framework with which to live life by. So I find myself in an interesting position where I'm sometimes advocating for religion, even though myself, I don't really partake in it. Definitely a space for it in South Africa, and definitely something that can benefit communities. We don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater on that one. I would like to speak to you about the role of sex workers in South Africa and about the idea around formalizing the market. Sex work is very prevalent. It's something that takes place in the shadows, but in all spaces in South Africa. It's everywhere. And there's a lot of taboos that go along with this. And I have a very interesting perspective. It makes a lot of people really, really upset. But I consider a sex worker to be very similar in a sense to a professional boxer or a professional rugby player. That what you do is in a way, you sell your physicality for a living. You sell the potential for physical harm, in a sense, against an income. And because patriarchy has shaped the nature of the world, the narrative is that rugby players and boxers are heroes. We raise them up on a pedestal, but sex workers must do what they do in the shadows. Oh, I'm going to get a lot of hate in the comment sections for saying that. So that's my personal opinion on it. And I would just like to ask you what you think of what I've just said and what you also think about formalizing sex work in South Africa and making it a real regulated profession.
Okay. I'll go back to an issue of choices, right? Right to choice as per our constitution. So if we formalize it, for me, it's a tick. Can formalize it because we are trying to mitigate things that can happen to sex workers that can be of harm to them. So when we formalize them, we know that when we formalize it, then we know we are capping out 1, 2, 3, 4 for their benefit. Having said that, even if it is formalized, for me the concern is there's always people who are taking advantage of other people. Because we know that sex work is accessible to everyone. It's just that people do it differently. There are those who of high profile who will never be caught and will be willing to pay whatever rate that is charged. There are those of higher profile who might be caught because they didn't want to pay, but nothing happens to them because they are of higher caliber. So formalizing it in a way, yes, it is a good thing in the sense that it will mitigate abuse.
The power dynamic issue is that sex workers have no power themselves.
Exactly. I think the issue for me of power dynamics, whether we regulate it, the power dynamics will still exist. But at the same time, or at the end of the day, it will be up to how empowered a sex worker is in terms of how do you defend yourself. And yes, you are right when you say, Aidan, people do it for income. I've got numerous examples where people would say openly, I am who I am because of this very same job. If I was never involved in sex work, I wouldn't have been where I am in terms of degree. It's just that my purpose then was to make sure that as I engage to this kind of job, I make sure that I don't bring any extra problems to myself, like maybe having unplanned babies or having STIs or all those things, just to make sure that I reach my goal. There's very few of those cases, those people that can reach that. But obviously the rest would be prone to abuse and being taken advantage of. So yes, in terms of finalizing it, tick. But also it will also go back to how
regulation.
do we then regulate it and enforce the repercussions when there is some mishap in the process.
As it is currently, if a sex worker or a prostitute, maybe for a use of another term, went to a police station and said that I was assaulted last week or the night before, whatever the circumstances happen to be, they get almost no help at a police station. Nobody wants to hear their story. They don't really have any support at all because it immediately falls back to the narrative of, well, you're a criminal as well. And for me, until there's some kind of regulatory framework in place, I don't know how we would ever begin to turn the tide on this. It is a very, very high risk profession, so to speak, and there's a lot of abuses that go down there. There's homicide at a very high rate in relation to other things. So yeah, I'm hoping that it is something that the South African government has enough maturity to try and create a formal framework around in the years to come.
And also to constantly empower the sex workers in terms of their rights and also their responsibilities.
Yes.
Because as they continue with the type of employment, they need to know the repercussions. If this can happen to me, or this is how I avoid this happening to me. So at least that insight and knowledge should be a constant journey, so that it doesn't only focus to the perpetrators, those who will be taking advantage, but also empowering them and making sure that they take good care of themselves.
The situation is so unique and so dynamic as it stands now that I think we should have specialized police units that work in conjunction with sex worker, social workers.
I was going to say that.
Where again, we've spoken about the need for interdepartmental synergy between police and social services in order to get this running effectively. But that situation is so unique that until you have that kind of synergy, I don't know how you would enforce sex workers' rights in a court, for example. So again, yeah, I do understand that prostitutes or sex workers have a huge amount of risks that they face. They're most often just people that are just trying to get by in life, just trying to earn a living. And I really hope that the South African government attempts to pass some kind of reformatory bill in the near future.
But also, having said that, I also think starting will then give us a direction, or in the sense of, are we winning, are we losing, what is it that we need to refine? Because I can recall when there was the TOP, termination of pregnancy.
Yes.
It was not an easy act. When we started to say it is now official, you can terminate, and there were ages and whatever, by when you can do this. It was not easy, particularly from the religious background. But look where we are now, steadily there's people buying in, there's people saying yes, there's people still saying no. So as people choose what works for you or what works for me, then we refine and make sure that we are doing things that at the end of the day are not going to be harmful to anyone.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you, because I knew that your lineage, your long experience in the sector would give perspective and insight. And what you've basically just said is actually, in a way, a small success story in South Africa.
Yes.
Where you said at one point, when I was early on in my career, we had these issues, we dealt with them, and when we look back now, we've actually done quite well.
And also the therapist, it's up to us, if you are a practicing social worker, to say, when you know, you know. When you don't know, it's feel free to say, okay, I don't think I am empowered enough to handle this case. Would you mind if I refer you?
Yes.
Then you refer where you know that the person. And when I teach ethics and values, I always tell my student, you deal with the behavior of a person. Never judge a person because you're seeing a person and be like, you are a rapist, you are, because you do not know the rationale behind.
Yep.
So first understand from your service user, how did we come here? And then from there, your intervention will make sense. But if I walk in and I'm like, I raped last night, and you're like, no wonder you're a rapist, I'm calling the police, blah, 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 before getting that rationale, you might miss the point. But if you are more skilled and you are more aware of the importance of assessment, by the time you introduce intervention, yes, it might lead to legal processes, but you would have a better understanding of who am I and why did I land where I am.
I think that's just a really beautiful, kind and empathetic thought that you've had. In a way, what you're saying, or the way that I hear it, is to never judge a person by their worst moment, their single worst moment. That no one person is just one bad moment that they have. Everybody's more complex and more dynamic than just one bad thing or one bad moment that they've had in their lives. Very interesting. There was a time in South Africa where one of the most popular things for people to talk about, that people were shocked about all the time, was child-run households. It was in the news all the time. Everybody was speaking about it, and there was a lot of shock. This was around the early 2000s. It started emerging as this story. It was on Carte Blanche, and all these things started to come about. And I've noticed that no one really talks about child-run households anymore, that it's not a popular topic. I think this might be because we're losing the war on child-run households, that we weren't able to stem the tide. So the politicians came out and they said, we are going to put an end to this, and all the households are going to get documented and assign social workers, and we're going to do this and that. And I think that the reason we've gone quiet on the story of child-run households is because it's not a success story.
I'll hold another view, in the sense that there are few thriving stories of child-headed households when there was a doubt to say it will never work, and it's not working. But there are stories where when therapists or professionals came together and using the principle that I referred to, starting where the client or the service users are, the stories have become successful. One of the reasons why we had a child-headed household then was to avoid separating children to different spaces. Yes. Number two was to maintaining or making sure that there's a centered family life, because we will be in the same. However, we made sure that when you are a child-headed household, you then have someone who is a relative who would be sort of an overseer.
Yes, a kind of mentor, household mentor.
Yes, and that story, or those stories, they work very well. In some areas, I have stories that I can say, this is where we started, this is where we started, and this is where we are. And the unfortunate part is that we can't do away with child house-headed families, because life has become the opposite. Instead of parents bearing their children are bearing their parents, and it's growing. So there's no way where we can say, no, this it's going to die or it's not working.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the resources of sustaining it.
It's not something that to be rid of, is what you're saying. It's something that we need to take care of better.
Yes.
I completely understand that.
Yes.
Now, that makes complete sense, given the socioeconomic conditions that we have in South Africa, that kind of thing's not going to go away. And that's actually an amazing insight, because when you can admit that a problem's not going to go away, that's your first step in mitigating against those issues. Again, I've never really heard somebody say this before. I knew it would be great to interview you, because you have a very granular perspective of these family units. And the problem with somebody like me is that I look far out and I zoom in. I have a very macro look. And without your granular perspective on that, I actually wouldn't have understood that. For me, it was always an issue that we needed to stamp out. And so for me, you've changed an idea just in my mind, and hopefully in the minds of a few viewers that listen to this as well, that we need to help these households, we need to assist these households, we need to support them, we need to provide them with access to networks. To get rid of them, that's not a solution in any... we're down to our last couple of questions. We are kind of running out of time. The last one, I think, is an area of particular interest to you, and that is around the status of the fight against HIV and AIDS in South Africa. We recently found out that some of the aid from America would be pulled, and that this would have a fairly devastating consequence or effect on quite a lot of South Africans. My view is that the government and the social services network isn't reactive enough to find a solution to this quickly, or quickly enough in such a way that people aren't ultimately just going to die. So the way I view it is that between the pulling of the funding and our inability as a country to react adequately and quickly enough, that the pulling of the funding for the HIV/AIDS treatment in South Africa will literally equate to people dying.
I definitely agree, because if you look at from where we come from in terms of treating HIV and AIDS to how we have improved access through the help of extra funding, and suddenly there's no funding that's going to be offered, we're definitely heading for a crisis. But I do believe that, like you're saying, if our government can be realistically be proactive, now that there's no funding, how is the government going to mitigate and execute the plan?
I haven't even heard anyone talk about it.
So we now we only hear from the social media that, okay, no, we have money, we'll never run out, people will never run out of treatment. But there is no clear framework of this is what we're going to do. And indeed, I agree with you that there's a fear of, if nothing gets done, or eventually it's left to the last minute, we're heading for a disaster for the progress that we have done, because we have progressed in terms of access to treatment and moving from the methods of treatments that have been available and the resources and the NGO that have been supporting people with HIV and AIDS. But if we leave it up to the last minute, we are indeed heading for a disaster.
So you think that South Africa's actually done better? We've improved from the Mbeki era in terms of our fight against HIV?
Far better.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Far better.
Yeah. I'm so glad to hear that, because the
far better. Yeah. And maybe it's because I also teach HIV and AIDS in workplace at a master's level, looking at how the impact or the effects of employees who are HIV positive.
Well, you'll have access to data.
Yes, so we have improved.
Yeah, your view is going to be informed by data, knowledge, lived experience, whereas a lot of people like me who think that we're actually going backwards on the fight against HIV we don't understand it. We just rely on narratives that we pick up on social media or from friends in passing. So that's actually also another small South African success story. I think it's really important for us as a nation to celebrate small successes.
Yes.
And I'm truly both surprised, if I can be honest, and quite happy to hear that we're actually doing better than the common narrative sometimes misleads us to believe.
No, we are definitely doing better.
I'm sure you have to go. I know you'll have to go and mark papers or lecture students. I'm down to just my last two questions. We're running just a tiny bit over time. We're now 10 minutes over time. The 350 Rand grants impact sustainability long term. If you could take that 350 Rand grant and take all the money that is allocated to it and change it to some other kind of mechanism or some other grant, say instead of a universal 350, you make it 700, but only a childhood food grant or something like that, would you change it? Or do you think that given the limited amounts of resources we have, the 350 Rand grant is as good as we can do?
Because we have different types of grant for childcare or childcare support, my inclination is that I wouldn't change the 350 because for me, the 350 for people who are responsible has made a great difference.
Yes.
Yes. And obviously, there are those who are taking chances for using it or misusing it for other things. But I wouldn't change the 350. However, if there is a way of introducing something that's going to be sustainable, because
Yes.
we don't know where the 350, what's the source of income for 350, and when will that coffers come to an end, and then we're back to square one. So I would be thinking of another option that's going to be sustainable to say, should we run off or we run them concurrently, the 350 and something that's going to be sustainable for people in need, I would go for that option.
Something more sustainable, yeah, because that's been one of the biggest complaints about the 350 grant is just its
sustainability,
sheer lack of long-term sustainability, and also for some people 350, depending on their circumstances, it's an incredibly
it's close to nothing. But for some to have that,
just to survive,
just to survive, wake up and have some meal and something, then it makes a big difference.
Enough to buy samp and meal and just a little bit to keep your head above water. We are down to our last question, so I'm going to let you go fairly soon. You've been an absolutely fantastic guest.
Thank you.
We very briefly mentioned the Bella Act. I would like to ask how you would maintain discipline in schools. One of the biggest problems that we have in South Africa now, obviously corporal punishment, completely illegal. That was something that was abused. It was cruel and unusual. And I think that did a lot of harm. And on the backside of that, teachers now complain that classroom discipline is absolutely horrendous, that they find it incredibly difficult to control the students, to maintain a good learning environment. And I was just wondering if there's any mechanism that you could think of or that you like, that you believe should be more reinforced or used more progressively in order to make schools more compliant learning environments for students and teachers.
My view is that discipline shouldn't start at schools. Discipline started from home, and I normally use a three-legged pot when I teach in terms of students and learning. We have the students, we have the community, we have the lecturers. So when we work together as those three legs, we make sure that whatever we are cooking inside there will come out the best. But if one leg falls, obviously there's going to be a challenge in terms of the fire circulating appropriately. So for me, the issue of family, the issue of community, the issue of collaboration in the three legs, it's a serious
It's such
concern.
a nice analogy, the three-legged pot. I've never heard that before.
Yes, so I use that and say, if one leg falls off, then obviously we will have big problems. So same as for me, if in a school setting, that platform of saying, okay, we're going to involve parents. Unfortunately, parents barely attend school
Yes.
meetings for their children, just to get insight of who your child is, how is your child. Even when it's child teacher in a learner meeting, sometimes we are defensive as parents to say, it cannot be my son, cannot be my daughter.
Oh, of course.
And we're killing that daughter or son in the near future. So I still believe that if we can work together in terms of three-legged something, we would go far.
Yes.
And the last point for me is, if something is right, I need to say it. In my class, if I say, okay, you need to be on time. We start from there. Let's agree. Yes. You come late, I ask them. Though they're a university student, I ask my first years, you come late, what do we do? Let's agree as a class. Discipline. You didn't do an assignment, what do we do? We haven't started teaching.
Yes.
We start on those basics, we record, okay. So when it happens, we go back to our agreement. What did we say? What happens when you come late? Then it's an issue that has been taken care of by the community.
Yes.
It's no longer about Prof. Nkomo's idea. It's us. We had agreed that this is what's going to happen. So if the three legs agree that to nurture this person, we need to make sure that we work together, and eventually we'll get great results. Obviously, corporal punishment is out of this, but if we keep smaller strategies, can result to greater deal.
In relation to raising children, educating children and disciplining children, I absolutely love your analogy about the three-legged part, that you need community, you need family, you need the school. They all need to act together. Without one of the legs, the pot falls over and everything spills. For me, it's an absolutely beautiful analogy that ties up the old phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Mm-hmm. You have been an incredibly generous source of knowledge and information. There really aren't a lot of people like you. You can imagine not a lot of people make it to the status of professor, especially at a university this prestigious. So I would just like to thank you, Professor Thobeka Nkomo, for being on the show, for sharing your knowledge and information with us. You've been incredibly candid, you've been incredibly knowledgeable, and you've also been very honest. You haven't pulled any punches, and we really appreciate that a lot. So I'm Aidan Brown, executive producer Ben Matjiu in the studio or office as it is today, and the very esteemed Professor Thobeka Nkomo. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, Aidan. Last closing remarks from myself in terms of, in addition from being an academic, I'm a mom, my wife, my husband is a minister in the Methodist Church.
Oh, amazing.
So the plus is that I get access and platforms that no one could get, like leading the young women, interacting with the older women, interacting with the youth in the church. So like I was saying, whatever space I get, I make sure that the knowledge that I have, I can impart, just make sure that I choose the tone and the skill that is relevant for each and every platform.
The information that you've shared with us today, it's very obvious that you have a very broad and balanced view of the world. That you are a mom comes through, that you are a community leader comes through, that you're an academic comes through. You're definitely a multifaceted person, a dynamic person, not one-dimensional by any stretch of the imagination.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wish you well.
Thank you very much for joining us on the main stage. Follow us on YouTube, Apple, TikTok, Instagram. We're absolutely everything. I'm Aidan Brown. You can find me at strategycoachconsulting.com. Ben Matjiu at Ben Shot This Photography. And thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now.